Karoline Leavitt walked onto the plane with a quiet determination that belied the storm churning inside her. Dressed in a sharply tailored blazer and an elegant business skirt that spoke of decades of refined taste and hard-won experience, her softly curled hair framed a face that had witnessed both life's triumphs and its harsh cruelties. In one hand, she clutched a sleek leather laptop briefcase, a symbol of her professional achievements and unyielding dignity, while in the other she held her boarding pass with a steady grip. Despite the curious glances and hushed whispers from fellow passengers, Karoline exuded an air of calm assurance, forged through years of battling prejudice and injustice in a world too eager to belittle her very existence. Moments after she settled into her reserved first-class seat, a brisk presence cut through the gentle hum of the cabin. Jessica Reed, a flight attendant in a crisp uniform with a gaze sharp enough to cut through tension, strode purposefully down the aisle. Jessica's outward professionalism concealed a seething, personal vendetta, a bias that went far beyond mere political disagreement. With every step, it was clear that Jessica viewed Karoline not as a fellow traveler but as a target, a living reminder of everything she despised. As fate would have it, Karoline, a prominent conservative with a long history of overcoming adversity, was exactly the person Jessica had decided to single out, fueling her contempt with every fiber of her being. "Excuse me, may I see your boarding pass?" Jessica asked in a tone that, while outwardly polite, carried an unmistakable edge of hostility. Karoline, ever composed, returned a warm yet measured smile and handed over the pass as if extending an olive branch to a long-lost friend. Yet, the moment Jessica scanned the ticket, her eyes narrowed and her voice dropped to a skeptical murmur. "This is a first-class ticket, right?" Karoline nodded simply, her confidence unshaken by the thinly veiled disdain in Jessica's tone. The quiet exchange was charged with tension that hinted at a much larger battle, one where political ideology and racial prejudice intertwined to create an atmosphere of unrelenting injustice. Without a word to justify her actions, Jessica's lips pressed into a thin line as she returned the boarding pass and turned away, leaving behind an aura of cold disapproval. But the true cruelty of that moment was only just beginning. Within minutes, Jessica reappeared with an air of unwarranted authority that betrayed her inner malice. "Ms. Leavitt, could you step aside for a moment? I need to check something," she demanded, her voice now icy and laced with personal vendetta. The use of Karoline's surname only deepened the sting of betrayal. Here was a woman who had endured enough, a lifetime marred by discrimination, now being publicly humiliated over a simple seating arrangement. Karoline rose gracefully, gathering her briefcase with a dignity that made the murmurs in the cabin swell with sympathy and indignation. As they moved into the cramped galley, every whispered comment and curious glance from first-class passengers reinforced the notion that this was no ordinary mix-up. It was a deliberate act of cruelty, a calculated attempt to diminish Karoline's stature because of who she was and what she represented. "I'm going to have to ask you to move to another seat," Jessica stated flatly, crossing her arms as if to emphasize that Karoline did not belong in the prestigious first class. Karoline's eyes, deep with the pain of years spent weathering the slings and arrows of prejudice, flickered with quiet defiance as she responded softly, "I don't understand. My ticket is valid. I booked it weeks ago." But Jessica, her tone growing ever more caustic and her words revealing long-buried bitterness, replied in a voice dripping with contempt, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but I can't explain in detail right now. I feel uncomfortable with someone like you sitting in first class." In that moment, the cruel truth was laid bare. This was not a mere error, but a calculated act of discrimination, a mix of political bias and racial prejudice that cut deep into Karoline's soul. Reluctantly escorted to the cramped confines of the economy section, the injustice of the situation weighed heavily on every heart in the cabin. The humiliation was profound, resonating with every passenger who had ever been the target of societal bias. In the narrow seat of economy, with limited space and a stifling sense of confinement, Karoline's grip on her briefcase tightened. Yet behind that sorrow lay a simmering resolve, a promise of retribution that was as calculated as it was inevitable. In a hushed, almost conspiratorial tone, she pulled out her phone and sent a discreet message. "Hello, it's me. I need some assistance. Something's happened, and I want it handled immediately." Her words, though soft-spoken, carried a determination as chilling as it was inspiring. This was not merely a call for help. It was the first step toward a grand, meticulously planned retaliation that would one day leave her tormentor, Jessica, utterly speechless. While Jessica resumed her duties with a veneer of professionalism, ensuring that first-class passengers received their drinks and attentive service, her mind remained fixated on the encounter. In quiet moments, as she moved about the cabin, a sense of triumph mingled with a nagging doubt that her actions might have sown seeds of retribution she could not control. In whispered conversations with a fellow attendant named David, Jessica's true intentions surfaced. "Did you see that woman earlier?" she confided in a low, conspiratorial tone, glancing disdainfully in Karoline's direction. David, seasoned and cautious, warned her, "You better hope this doesn't backfire," a subtle admonition hinting at consequences lurking in the shadows. Yet Jessica's pride and prejudice blinded her to the broader implications of her actions, and she continued with a self-assured smirk that belied the undercurrents of discontent among the crew. Back in the economy section, Karoline's gaze wandered out the window, where the expansive sky stretched out in a vast, unbroken blue, a stark contrast to the narrow confines of the seat that now held her captive. Every mile the plane flew over the rugged American landscape seemed to carry her further from the injustices of the past and closer to a future where retribution would be delivered with the precision of a well-laid plan. In that moment, every insult, every discriminatory remark, and every instance of being pushed aside because of her political views and background coalesced into a single, powerful determination. Karoline's eyes shone with an inner fire, a promise that her suffering would soon transform into a grand spectacle of righteous revenge, one that would expose the cruelty of a system steeped in bias and leave even the most hardened hearts in a state of awe. Even as a kind attendant named Emily approached with genuine concern, a simple cup of water and a soft inquiry about Karoline's well-being, the air grew thick with the gravity of the situation. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" Emily asked gently, and although Karoline replied with a calm, measured, "I'm fine, thank you, it's just a minor mix-up," her voice carried an unspoken warning that this slight was far from trivial. Every word, every pause in that exchange resonated with the quiet strength of a woman who had endured enough injustice to fill a lifetime. The incident was not merely about a seating error. It was a microcosm of a much larger, systemic injustice. A reminder that even in the skies, the ancient evils of discrimination and prejudice could rear their ugly heads. As the flight progressed and the familiar hum of the engines blended with the soft murmur of passengers, Karoline's mind raced with thoughts of retribution. Her calm exterior was merely a mask for the storm building within. A storm fueled by decades of marginalization and the bitter sting of public humiliation. With each passing moment, she meticulously noted every detail in her small notebook, plotting a course that promised to bring down the very forces that had so brazenly disrespected her. She was not content to let this moment dissolve into the annals of forgotten grievances. Instead, she was determined to transform it into a turning point. A moment of catharsis that would challenge the arrogance and cruelty of those who believed themselves untouchable. The seeds of a grand and meticulously planned revenge were sown in that cramped economy seat, where Karoline Leavitt sat silently, her thoughts as deep and turbulent as the skies outside. She vowed to reclaim her dignity and to show that every act of discrimination, no matter how insidious, would eventually be met with a response both powerful and unforgettable. The injustice of being forced from first class to economy was not just an isolated incident. It was the spark that would ignite a conflagration of retribution, so magnificent and far-reaching that it would forever alter the dynamics of power and prejudice aboard that flight. and beyond. Every passenger who witnessed the encounter felt the weight of history pressing down on them, a reminder that the struggle for equality and respect was an ongoing battle. As the plane sliced through the American skies at over 500 miles per hour, Karoline Leavitt was not merely a victim of an unjust act. She was a symbol of resilience and defiance. Her measured silence and steely determination promised that one day, the forces of discrimination and hatred would be met with a response so grand and meticulously orchestrated that it would echo across the nation, leaving even the most hardened hearts in a state of awe and regret. Today, as the flight continued its journey across the vast American landscape, Karoline's quiet resolve set the stage for a future where every slight, every racist remark, and every unjust act would be repaid in full. A future where justice, dignity, and the indomitable power of a determined spirit would triumph over even the darkest prejudices. Jessica Reed's heart pounded as she accepted the receiver from a fellow crew member, the weight of the moment pressing down on her like a lead blanket. "They asked for you by name," the man had said softly, and now the call from United Airlines operations rang in her ear. "Hello, this is Jessica," she offered in a cautious, trembling voice. On the other end, a deep, firm voice intoned, "This is United Airlines operations. We have received a direct complaint about an incident involving a first-class passenger. You are to submit a detailed report upon landing. For now, ensure all passengers are treated with respect and no further seat changes occur without valid reason." As the words sank in, Jessica's face paled and her hand shook uncontrollably. "Yes, of course," she stammered, feeling the chill of impending consequence. The call left her shaken and filled with a growing dread that clung to her like a shadow as she moved through the cabin. Despite her best efforts to regain control, every step she took was haunted by the memory of that disapproving voice from operations. She forced herself to smile at passengers and perform her duties with a mechanical precision, yet her eyes kept darting toward the economy section where Karoline Leavitt sat with an unnerving calm. Karoline's composed demeanor, as she leaned back in her seat and occasionally glanced at her watch, ignited a fierce mixture of irritation and fear in Jessica's heart. It was as though Karoline possessed a secret confidence that undermined every attempt Jessica made to assert control, and that realization only deepened the resentment that had been simmering within her for far too long. In a series of measured moments, Karoline appeared utterly unruffled. She crossed her legs with quiet dignity, casually picked up an in-flight magazine and flipped through its pages as if her day had not been disrupted by the earlier incident. Yet, in the recesses of her mind, every step of her meticulously planned course of retribution was unfolding exactly as she had intended. The contrast could not have been starker. While Jessica's hands trembled and her voice faltered, Karoline radiated an aura of deliberate composure that made every observer wonder if there was more to her than met the eye. Shortly after, Emily, a kind economy attendant whose warm smile offered a stark contrast to the tension that filled the cabin, approached Karoline once more. "Ma'am, would you like anything, water or a snack?" Emily asked softly. Karoline returned a polite smile, replying in a gentle tone, "Just water, thank you." Emily promptly brought a cup and a napkin, placing them on the tray with tender care. This simple, genuine act of kindness only served to deepen Jessica's unease as she watched the graceful exchange from a distance, feeling the control she so desperately craved slipping further away. The steady hum of the plane at 30,000 feet only heightened Jessica's anxiety, each passing minute stretching interminably as she wrestled with the dual weight of her own guilt and the impending consequences of her actions. Her thoughts churned uncontrollably as she retreated to the galley, where David was busy preparing drinks for the next round of service. "Everything okay?" David asked with genuine concern, glancing at her face that betrayed more than the polite smile. Jessica hesitated for a moment before curtly replying, "Fine," though David's eyes spoke volumes of his skepticism. Leaning in slightly, his tone grew low and cautionary as he warned, "Look, whatever is going on, you better hope you didn't mess with the wrong person." First class isn't for amateurs, Jessica. These people have connections. His words struck a nerve deep within her, and as she busied herself with arranging cups, her mind kept returning to the unsettling image of Karoline Leavitt, a woman whose calm demeanor and secretive glances now ignited a spark of fear in Jessica. As if to remind her of the high stakes, a folded note was discreetly handed to Jessica by David. The note simply read, "Captain wants to see you." And with that terse instruction, Jessica found herself grumbling her way to the cockpit. As the heavy door closed behind her, the familiar hum of the cabin faded, replaced by a suffocating silence and the looming threat of accountability. Inside the cockpit, Captain Harris, a middle-aged man whose calm and commanding presence left little room for dispute, turned to face her. The co-pilot offered only a brief glance before returning to his duties, leaving Captain Harris to speak in a measured tone. "Jessica, we just got another call from operations," he began, and with that, Jessica's heart sank even further. "Sir?" she managed to say, her voice catching as she awaited further explanation. With a raised hand to silence her, the captain continued, "This is serious. The passenger you moved, Karoline Leavitt, isn't just any passenger. She is connected to powerful people. We have been directly ordered to ensure she is treated with the utmost respect for the rest of this flight." Jessica's mouth went dry as the weight of her mistake bore down on her. "I didn't know," she mumbled weakly, trying in vain to justify her actions. I thought, she faltered, only to be cut off sharply by Captain Harris. "Or assumed," he interjected coldly. "From where I'm standing, you acted without cause. That is not acceptable." The stern rebuke left her speechless and shamed. The captain's next words were clear and uncompromising. "Here's the deal. You will continue your duties and ensure no more incidents occur. When we land, you will submit a full report to the ground team. Until then, do not approach Miss Leavitt unless absolutely necessary." With a whispered "Yes, sir," and cheeks burning with shame, Jessica stepped out of the cockpit, her mind reeling from the scolding and the looming threat of retribution. Back in the galley, David shot her a questioning look as she re-entered the cabin, but Jessica barely acknowledged him as she grabbed a drink tray. Every step was laden with anxiety and regret, and her hands trembled so much that when she poured coffee for a first-class passenger, a few drops spilled onto the tray. Muttering a quiet curse under her breath, she hastily wiped away the mess and continued her service with a fragile, forced smile. Meanwhile, in the economy cabin, Karoline Leavitt remained as composed as ever. Her every move was deliberate and dignified, a stark contrast to the chaos that now seemed to envelop Jessica. At one point, as Jessica hurried past, their eyes met for just a split second, a silent exchange where Karoline's gaze was devoid of malice and exuded an unsettling calm, as though she already knew the full outcome of this unfolding drama. This brief meeting of eyes only intensified Jessica's inner turmoil, and she quickened her pace, retreating back to the safety of the galley. For the first time in her career, Jessica felt utterly powerless, a sensation that gnawed at her pride and self-assurance. She leaned against the galley counter, clutching its edge tightly, as David finished prepping the snack cart. "You gonna tell me what's going on?" he asked softly, his tone cautious yet laced with concern. Jessica hesitated, debating whether to confide in him. Finally, with a heavy sigh, she whispered, "The woman I moved, she's connected to important people. The captain just told me." David's expression shifted from mild curiosity to genuine concern as he pressed further. "Important how? You serious?" Jessica nodded, her face paling further as she admitted, "I had no idea. I don't even know what I thought." Her voice trailed off, and David crossed his arms with a disappointed shake of his head, as though he could not believe that someone who was meant to uphold the standards of service could have misjudged a passenger so gravely. In the economy section, Karoline glanced at her watch once more, her serene expression never wavering. The flight was now halfway through, yet she showed no signs of impatience. Instead, she pulled her phone from her leather briefcase and sent a brief, cryptic message. "It's almost time." Stowing her phone with deliberate calm, She leaned back in her seat, her demeanor as steady as the endless blue sky visible through the window. Nearby, a curious passenger whispered to another, "Are you really okay? That flight attendant looks so stressed out." Only to be met by Karoline's faint but resolute smile and a polite, "Thank you for your concern, but everything is under control." The quiet confidence in her voice made the onlookers wonder if she was hiding a strength far beyond what met the eye. At the front of the plane, Jessica tried desperately to regain her composure, moving through first class with a forced, fragile smile while checking on passengers. Yet inside, her mind was a turbulent whirlwind. The knowledge that Karoline Leavitt was not only powerful, but also handled the situation with an unyielding calm, unsettled her deeply. That restraint, that quiet authority, was something Jessica had never encountered before, and it made her feel exposed and vulnerable. Each glance toward the economy cabin, where Karoline continued to write in her notebook and gaze steadily out the window, served as a stark reminder that every discriminatory act and every unjust decision would soon have consequences far beyond Jessica's control. The tension built in the air like a tightly wound spring, and every passing minute seemed to stretch into eternity as the consequences of her actions loomed larger. By the time the flight neared its conclusion, the entire cabin was charged with an unspoken intensity. Jessica's attempts to maintain control had crumbled under the weight of responsibility, and the growing realization that her prejudice had set in motion a chain of events that would not easily be undone. In the quiet moments before landing, as the plane sliced through the American skies at hundreds of miles per hour, the atmosphere was thick with foreboding. Karoline Leavitt, ever serene and unruffled, embodied a silent promise that retribution would be both measured and magnificent, a promise that would leave those responsible for her humiliation reeling in regret. The unfolding drama was no longer just about a seating arrangement. It had become a powerful reckoning of discrimination, cruelty, and the indomitable spirit of a woman who refused to be cowed by injustice. As the plane continued its journey through the endless American sky, a chime rang out from the cabin, signaling an upcoming announcement. The familiar, calm voice of Captain Harris flowed over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. United Airlines thanks you for flying with us today. The flight is proceeding smoothly and we will land on schedule. Please continue to enjoy your flight, and if you need anything, don't hesitate to contact the crew." To most passengers, the announcement was routine, but to Jessica Reed, each word felt like a bitter reminder of her mounting mistake. She stole a furtive glance down the economy aisle and met Karoline Leavitt's unwavering eyes. In that brief moment, Karoline offered a slight nod, a gesture that was neither arrogant nor provocative, but a calm, confident acknowledgement that sent a shiver down Jessica's spine. Whatever plan Karoline had been orchestrating, Jessica was beginning to understand that she was utterly unprepared for the storm now gathering. Jessica returned to the galley to prepare for the next round of service, her hands still trembling as the hum of the plane's engines filled the cabin. Every movement she made was mechanical, as if she were trying to convince herself that she could still maintain control, but her mind was a tumult of anxiety and dread. She avoided any further eye contact with the passengers in economy, yet the silent power emanating from Karolina's composed presence was impossible to ignore. Karoline sat in her seat like a picture of calm, checking her watch and then glancing at the small screen in front of her that displayed the flight's progress. For a fleeting moment, a small smile played at the corners of her lips before disappearing as quickly as it came. She leaned forward slightly, pulled out her notebook, and began writing with deliberate precision. Each word was chosen with care, as if recording the unfolding drama in detail. To the casual observer, it looked like a mundane moment, but to Karoline, it was a critical part of her carefully laid plan. Back in the galley, Jessica's mind churned with regret and panic. The memory of David's stern warning echoed in her ears. "You better hope you didn't mess with the wrong person. People like Karoline Leavitt do not take kindly to being crossed." His words had cut her deeply, and now, as she leaned against the counter with her arms crossed, she felt completely trapped. David's concerned eyes met hers as he finally broke the heavy silence. "You've been on edge ever since that call. What really is going on, Jessica?" he asked, his tone low and earnest. Jessica's gaze flicked toward the curtain that separated the galley from the economy cabin. Her voice came out as little more than a whisper. "I told you, the passenger I moved has important connections." David's brow furrowed further, and he pressed on with a mix of concern and admonishment. "Important enough for the captain to get involved. That is not just about connections, Jessica. That is a warning. What exactly did you do to her?" Jessica's reply was defensive and halting. "I didn't do anything. I just decided she didn't belong in first class." David cut her off sharply, his voice brimming with disapproval as he said, "Now you are paying the price. I've worked for this airline for years, and if you cross someone who is truly powerful, you better brace yourself. People like her do not let things slide easily." Jessica clenched her jaw, her frustration boiling beneath the surface as she struggled to answer, "What was I supposed to do?" But before she could muster a reply, David's warning echoed in her ears like a death knell. For the first time, Jessica felt the crushing weight of the consequences of her actions. Her hands, now gripping the counter so tightly that her knuckles turned white, betrayed her inner panic. Suddenly, another chime rang out in the cabin, a call signal from the galley phone. With a shaky hand, Jessica picked up the receiver. "Galley, this is Jessica," she said in a voice that tried and failed to sound steady. The crisp, authoritative tone of Captain Harris soon came through the line. "We have just received another communication from operations. They have requested that Ms. Leavitt receive priority service for the remainder of this flight. Ensure she is comfortable, and that a personal apology is extended to her for the earlier inconvenience." Jessica's breath caught in her throat as the gravity of the order sank in. "Yes, sir," she managed to reply, her voice strained and small. Hanging up, she stood frozen for a moment, as if the pressure of the situation had physically weighed her down. This was no longer a mere suggestion, it was an order, a stark admission that the power had now shifted irrevocably away from her. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Jessica gathered what little composure she could muster and stepped out of the galley. With a tray in her hands, holding a glass of soda, she made her way slowly toward the economy section. Each step felt heavier than the last, laden with the realization that she had crossed an irreversible line. When she finally reached Karoline Leavitt's seat, time seemed to slow. Jessica's eyes darted nervously as she paused right in front of Karoline, the tray trembling in her grip. Karoline's face was as calm and unreadable as ever, a mask of serene control that only served to deepen the divide between them. The air in that narrow space thickened with tension, charged with the unspoken history of their conflict. Jessica forced a smile that did little to disguise her inner turmoil as she spoke. "Ms. Leavitt, I wanted to personally apologize for any inconvenience you experienced earlier. It was a misunderstanding on my part." Her voice was soft, almost pleading, as she placed the soda carefully on the tray in front of Karoline. For a long, heart-stopping moment, Karoline simply regarded the glass, her eyes studying Jessica with a mixture of cool detachment and quiet authority. Then, in a tone that was measured yet laden with a subtle finality, Karoline replied, "Thank you, but I think it will take more than a glass of soda to settle this." Those words hit Jessica like a sucker punch, leaving her momentarily speechless. She swallowed hard, her palms growing sweaty as she stammered, "Of course, if there is anything else I can do to make it right, please let me know." Karoline did not respond immediately. Instead, she leaned back in her seat, her gaze never leaving Jessica as she studied the woman before her, weighing each word and gesture. The silence stretched, heavy and unyielding, until finally Karoline offered a faint smile, not triumphant or mocking, but calm and confidently resolute. "I appreciate your effort," she said softly, "but I trust that United Airlines will handle this properly once we land." At that moment, Jessica's stomach dropped, the implications of Karoline's words settling like a stone in her chest. The mention of the airline's intervention was a clear signal that Karoline would not let this matter rest, that it was far from over. With her head bowed and her voice barely audible, Jessica whispered, I understand." Without waiting for a response, she turned on her heel and hurried back to the galley, her face burning with humiliation and her mind racing with the dreadful realization that she had been utterly outmaneuvered. Back in the galley, David raised an eyebrow as he watched Jessica slump against the counter, her face ashen and her eyes distant. "How did it go?" he asked softly. Jessica could only shake her head, unable to articulate the torrent of emotions swirling inside her. "She's not done," she managed to say in a broken whisper. "She's going to take this all the way." David sighed heavily, his expression grim as he muttered, "I told you, people like her don't mess around. You should have been more careful." Jessica's gaze was fixed on the curtain that separated the galley from the economy section, a boundary that now seemed impenetrable. For the first time in her years with United Airlines, she felt completely small and powerless, overwhelmed by the realization that Karoline Leavitt was not just a passenger, but a force to be reckoned with. In the economy cabin, Karoline closed her notebook with deliberate care and slipped it into her leather briefcase. She straightened her posture, sitting upright as if preparing herself for the next phase of her carefully orchestrated plan. The whispers of nearby passengers were like background noise to her focused mind. Soon, another chime echoed through the cabin as Captain Harris's voice rang out with renewed authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our descent in a few minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts and raise your tray tables. Cabin crew, prepare for landing." The announcement stirred the cabin into a flurry of activity as passengers adjusted their seats and stowed their belongings. In response, Emily returned to Karoline's row with a warm smile, asking gently, "Can I get you anything before we land, Miss Leavitt?" Karoline shook her head politely and replied, "Thank you, Emily. You've been very attentive." Emily's cheeks flushed with the compliment, and she murmured, "If you need anything, just let me know," before moving on with her tasks. Meanwhile, in first class, Jessica busied herself with final pre-landing checks. Her movements remained stiff and mechanical as she tried desperately to maintain a neutral expression. Yet every time she caught a glimpse of Karoline, a vision of unruffled authority, seated in economy, her mind whirled with anxiety. The captain's orders and Karoline's loaded words echoed in her ears like a haunting refrain, each repetition a stark reminder of the irreversible consequences of her action. As the plane began its slow descent through the clouds, Karoline gazed out the window, watching the sprawling cityscape come into view below. Her fingers rested lightly on the armrest, her demeanor the very picture of poise, even as the storm of retribution loomed large over Jessica Reed. Karoline felt completely in control. Every step of this journey had unfolded exactly as she had anticipated, and now she was ready for what came next, a reckoning that promised to be as grand and as just as it was long overdue. The plane touched down smoothly on the tarmac as a collective sigh of relief rippled through the cabin, yet an undercurrent of tension lingered like a stubborn shadow, especially for Jessica Reed. As passengers unbuckled their seatbelts and began retrieving their carry-ons from the overhead bins, the usual hum of chatter and clatter filled the space, but every so often, a glance or a murmur betrayed the heaviness of what had transpired. Jessica stood near the exit, her face a mask of forced politeness as she greeted each departing passenger, yet inside, her stomach churned with dread. She was painfully aware of Karoline Leavitt's steady presence in the economy cabin and the crushing consequences that were about to come to fruition. When the seatbelt sign finally turned off, Karoline remained seated with an unhurried grace. She pulled her phone from her sleek leather briefcase and quickly typed a message that read simply, "Landed, ready." After stowing the phone away, her eyes swept purposefully toward the front of the plane where Jessica stood. In that fleeting moment, as the cool air from the open cabin door mingled with the residual warmth of the flight, their eyes met. Jessica's heart twisted painfully at that silent, loaded exchange. A nod from Karoline that was calm and confident, sending a chill down Jessica's spine. Whatever plan Karoline had meticulously laid out, it was now painfully clear to Jessica that she was utterly unprepared for the magnitude of the reckoning that lay ahead. Even as passengers began to file out, their rolling suitcases punctuating the murmur of casual goodbyes, Jessica forced herself to stand tall. She offered a stiff, trembling smile as she addressed each person, but her mind was locked on the exit, waiting for Karoline to step forward. Karoline did not rush into the fray. Instead, she waited until the aisle was nearly empty before rising with the same measured calm that had characterized her entire flight. She gathered her belongings with deliberate precision, a quiet act that spoke volumes to everyone who noticed. The crew, including Emily and David, exchanged discreet glances, as if they too sensed that something significant was about to unfold. When Karoline finally reached the exit, Jessica mustered the courage to approach her, her voice barely concealing the tremor of anxiety. "Thank you for flying with United Airlines, Miss Leavitt," she said, each word laced with a mix of regret and resignation. Karoline paused, her expression neutral but her eyes as piercing as ever. "I'm sure we'll be in touch," she replied smoothly, a tone that carried a weight so profound it chilled Jessica to her core. With that, Karoline stepped off the plane, leaving Jessica rooted in place, her face flushing with humiliation as the reality of her actions crashed down like a tidal wave. Before Jessica could process what had just occurred, David approached quietly and asked, "You okay?" His tone was gentle, but his eyes conveyed a deep-seated understanding of the storm that had just erupted. Jessica did not respond. She only stared fixedly toward the exit, as if expecting Karoline to return or for some further consequence to materialize. Her worst fears were confirmed when, moments later, 2 uniformed security officers boarded the plane. Their presence was commanding and unavoidable. They scanned the cabin and soon their gaze settled on Jessica. One of the officers stepped forward and asked in a firm, measured tone, "Are you Jessica Reed?" With her voice reduced to a faint whisper, Jessica replied, "Yes." The officer continued, "We need you to come with us. There are some questions regarding an incident on this flight." At that moment, Jessica's face drained of color as the full force of the consequences for her discriminatory actions bore down on her. David watched silently, his face a mixture of pity and admonishment, as the officers gently but firmly escorted her off the plane. Jessica's rigid posture belied the rising panic that now coursed through her veins. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew, including Emily, exchanged uneasy glances, uncertain of what would happen next. Outside the terminal, the scene was almost surreal in its calm contrast. Karoline Leavitt stood near the gate, phone in hand, her expression unreadable as she watched Jessica being led away by the security officers. The message Karoline had sent earlier had worked exactly as planned. In that moment, everything was falling into place. With measured steps and a poise that seemed almost regal, Karoline turned and began walking steadily toward baggage claim. She did not need to look back. She was completely in control, every move reinforcing the truth that the situation was now firmly in her grasp. Inside the bustling terminal, the cacophony of arrivals and departures served as a stark backdrop to the quiet drama unfolding in the security holding area. Jessica was now confined to a small, cold room furnished with a table and a couple of chairs. 2 stern-faced officers stood near the door, their professionalism belying the gravity of the situation. In that cramped space, Jessica's mind whirled as she desperately tried to piece together the rapid downfall of her career. Once a respected flight attendant, she had, in a matter of minutes, become the subject of a major investigation. The realization hit her like a blow, and she knew that this was no simple misunderstanding. It was a calculated response to her rash, emotionally driven decision. One of the officers finally broke the heavy silence, addressing her in a tone that brooked no argument. "Ms. Reed, we have been informed of an incident involving a first-class passenger on your flight," he continued. "United Airlines management has requested a full report on your actions." Jessica's throat felt dry as she struggled to speak. I don't know what this is about. I was just doing my job," she managed to say. The officer raised an eyebrow and pressed on. "According to the report, the passenger you moved was Karoline Leavitt. Are you aware of her position?" Jessica's heart sank further, and in a barely audible whisper she admitted, "I didn't know at first." The officer leaned in slightly, his gaze unyielding. "Miss Leavitt isn't just any first-class passenger. She is not only a renowned White House press secretary, but she also wields significant influence in political circles. Her complaint has reached the highest levels, and the discrimination allegations are being taken extremely seriously." Jessica's face turned ashen as the officer's words resonated with undeniable truth. He continued, "Miss Leavitt's statement has been recorded, and several passengers have corroborated her version of events. We are giving you a chance to explain your side, but be clear, this matter is not being taken lightly." Jessica's trembling hands clutched the edge of the table as she realized that no excuse would suffice. She had acted purely on political bias, and now she was reaping the devastating consequences of that prejudice. Elsewhere in the terminal, at baggage claim, Karoline stood near the carousel with her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice remained calm but carried an edge of decisiveness as she spoke to someone on her team. "Yes, security took her in for questioning. Make sure my team reviews the footage and collects all the statements. I want this handled professionally and thoroughly." She listened intently for a moment, nodding as the person on the other end replied, "Thank you. Send me the final report via X immediately. I want to ensure this never happens again, to me or to anyone else." Once the call ended, Karoline effortlessly retrieved a sleek black suitcase from the baggage carousel. Curious passengers glanced her way with a mix of admiration and intrigue, but she paid them no mind, her focus solely on the next steps of her broader plan for accountability and systemic change. Back in the security holding area, the officers finished their questioning and delivered a final, sharp statement to Jessica. "This will be forwarded to United Airlines Disciplinary Committee. You will be notified of their decision soon. For now, you are suspended from duty." Jessica felt her stomach drop as the officers exited the room, leaving her alone with her tangled thoughts and a crushing sense of regret. The reality of her situation was now impossible to ignore. For the first time, she truly understood the gravity of having underestimated Karoline Leavitt, a woman whose quiet strength and strategic mind had turned an act of discrimination into a catalyst for far-reaching change. At the same time, outside the terminal, Karoline's glossy black sedan pulled away smoothly, merging into the busy traffic. Standing curbside, Karoline gazed out the window with a calm clarity that belied the exhaustion of the day. Despite the challenges, she felt a deep satisfaction knowing that she had stood her ground and paved the way for accountability. Her phone buzzed with a message from her assistant, reporting that her recent social media post had gone viral and that millions of followers were now demanding a boycott of United Airlines. A small, satisfied smile curved her lips as she replied with a terse, "Good. Make sure this never happens again." As the city skyline came into view, Karoline leaned back in the comfortable seat of her sedan, exhaling slowly as she reflected on the day's events. Although this chapter was closing, she was fully aware that her actions had left an indelible mark on the system of corporate indifference and prejudice. Meanwhile, back in the cold, quiet room, Jessica remained seated, her eyes lost in the distance beyond the table. The heavy burden of her suspension, the looming investigation, and the painful awareness of the consequences of her emotional, discriminatory decision pressed down on her like an unbearable weight. In that long, silent moment, she could only whisper, "I didn't mean for this to happen," as she struggled to reconcile the person she once was with the harsh reality of her actions. After the plane landed and the wheels touched down smoothly on the tarmac, a collective sigh of relief rippled through the cabin, yet the tension that had been building throughout the flight now exploded into full-blown consequence. Jessica Reed sat alone in a small, cold room designated for security questioning, replaying every decision of the day like a relentless montage of regret. Every moment, every choice eroded her confidence, until what had once been a trusted instinct now revealed itself as an irreparable mistake. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts as she struggled to comprehend how a single act of political bias could shatter a lifelong career in service. Her phone buzzed sharply, snapping her out of her downward spiral. With a heavy heart and trembling hands, she picked it up, knowing that whatever message lay on the screen would only deepen her despair. The text was curt and chilling. "Jessica, please prepare to attend a disciplinary hearing at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Details will follow via email." The finality of those words hit her like a ton of bricks. The hearing was not just a procedural formality, it was the airline's desperate effort to protect its reputation, and Jessica knew she was now the scapegoat for an incident that was much larger than her own personal failing. She wanted to scream, to fight back with every ounce of indignation, but deep down, she understood that no amount of angry words could undo the damage that had been done. Half a world away, Karoline Leavitt's day was taking a very different turn. By the time Jessica's heart was sinking in the chilly holding room, Karoline had already reached the White House, where she served as the respected press secretary. Stepping out of her car with a grace that seemed both effortless and unassailable, she was greeted by her loyal colleagues. James held the door for her as she entered the building, and her assistant Sarah greeted her with a warm smile and a neatly organized stack of documents. "Here's everything," Sarah said, handing Karoline a folder filled with initial social media reactions, crew statements, and reports detailing a massive boycott wave against United Airlines. As Karoline flipped through the pages, her eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "They know this can't be covered up," she murmured calmly. "They're protecting their own interests, but the pressure we're applying will force real change." Sarah hesitated for a moment before asking cautiously, "Do you think that flight attendant will push back?" Karoline paused, considering the question with a measured calm that spoke of both wisdom and resolve. "Maybe," she replied slowly, "but it's not about her anymore. It's about the system that allowed someone to act on such blatant political bias and discrimination. That system needs to change." Sarah's eyes shone with admiration as she nodded. "You've already made a huge impact," she said softly. "United Airlines is in chaos because of you." Karoline offered a small, reserved smile, knowing full well that while her personal satisfaction was muted, the victory was monumental. Changing a system built on decades of indifference and prejudice was not about revenge. It was about demanding accountability and ensuring that no one else would ever be treated the same way. Back at the airport, after what felt like an eternity in that cold holding room, Jessica finally stood up, her legs shaking as she left the room. She avoided the searching eyes of both security and former colleagues as she headed toward the staff exit. Every step felt like a march of shame, each one echoing with the memory of a career built over years of dedication, now crumbling away. In her car, parked in a quiet lot near the terminal, Jessica stared blankly at the steering wheel, her thoughts a tangled mess of regret and sorrow. She had spent her entire life taking pride in her work, in serving passengers with a smile and a promise of safety, and now that pride was ruined by one catastrophic error. The thought of Karoline, so calm, so unassailable, so utterly untouchable, punctured her every attempt at denial. For the first time, Jessica allowed herself to feel a deep, aching regret that went far beyond anger or frustration. She had underestimated Karoline Leavitt, not just as a passenger, but as a force that represented everything she had tried so desperately to suppress. Meanwhile, Karoline's day was far from over. As she arrived at her office in the White House, she settled into her workspace with a cup of steaming tea and a stack of documents from Sarah. The office, with its polished wood and quiet efficiency, was a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding at United Airlines headquarters. Her phone buzzed with a message from a senior Trump advisor requesting an immediate meeting to discuss the United Airlines incident and the necessary next steps. With calm decisiveness, Karoline typed a brief reply. "I'll arrange a time for tomorrow morning. Ensure this is handled properly." Setting the phone aside, she leaned back in her chair, her mind already turning to the future. The events of the day had been exhausting, but she recognized that they had opened a a chance to reshape an entire institution. This was not about personal vindication. It was about setting a precedent that no one, regardless of position or ideology, should ever face such degrading treatment again. Morning light streamed through the office blinds, casting long shadows over Karoline's desk as she prepared for her meeting with the advisor, Robert Kane. She had spent the night reviewing every piece of evidence, drafting statements, and considering the broader impact of the incident. At exactly 10 a.m., Sarah ushered in Robert Kane, a tall, graying man whose confident demeanor was tempered by an unmistakable sense of unease. "Ms. Leavitt," Robert began carefully, "thank you for meeting on such short notice." Karoline nodded steadily, inviting him to take a seat across from her. "I appreciate that you're taking this situation seriously, Mr. Kane. Please, have a seat." After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Robert quickly moved to offer his apology on behalf of United Airlines. "First, I want to extend our deepest apologies for what happened on your flight. It was unacceptable, and I assure you we are committed to preventing such incidents in the future." Karoline listened with an unwavering gaze, her eyes as sharp as they were calm. "I'm glad to hear that," she said shortly. "But an apology alone is not enough. This was not just a single mistake made by a flight attendant. It was a systemic failure. It's an environment that allowed someone like that to believe it was acceptable to act on their prejudices." Robert's face tightened and he nodded in reluctant agreement. "You're absolutely right," he said. "We are now reviewing all our policies and have already begun bias training for our staff." Karoline leaned back, scrutinizing every word before responding. "That is a start, but I need a detailed timeline for these changes and regular progress updates. I expect tangible results, not just temporary fixes." Robert hesitated for a moment before nodding, promising that everything she required would be delivered. Karoline's small, satisfied smile spoke of a quiet triumph, a victory not just for her, but for every individual who had ever been subjected to discrimination. As the meeting stretched on, the weight of accountability hung heavy in the room. When Robert Kane finally shook Karoline's hand once again, his eyes reflected a genuine respect for her resolve. "Thank you for holding us accountable," he said earnestly. "We will make this right." Karoline's grip on his hand was firm and unwavering as she replied, "I will be watching to ensure that it is." While Karoline was orchestrating change at the highest levels, Jessica Reed was facing the harsh reality of her actions. In a sterile conference room at United Airlines headquarters, Jessica sat before 3 senior executives. Their expressions were neutral, but the underlying severity was unmistakable. A woman with sharp features spoke first, her voice measured. "Ms. Reed, thank you for coming. We are here to discuss the incident on the flight from Dulles and the allegations against you." Jessica nodded weakly, her throat parched. "I understand," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The executives meticulously reviewed the timeline of events, and Jessica attempted to explain herself, stammering that she thought the passenger might have been in the wrong seat and that she was merely following procedure. One executive raised an eyebrow in disbelief. "Procedure? According to our records, Miss Leavitt held a valid first-class ticket. When did you verify this before asking her to move?" Jessica's hands grew sweaty as she admitted in a barely audible tone, "I didn't." The room fell silent, and then another executive, a middle-aged man with glasses, leaned forward with a tone that brooked no argument. "Miss Reed, United Airlines maintains a zero-tolerance policy on discrimination. Your actions not only violated that policy, but they have also severely jeopardized our reputation. Do you understand the gravity of this?" Jessica nodded slowly, her heart sinking as the reality of her irreversible mistake became undeniable. By the end of the disciplinary hearing, the verdict was clear. The final decision, which would soon be delivered in writing, confirmed that Jessica Reed's career with United Airlines was over. As she left the room, the image of Karoline Leavitt, the poised, dignified woman who had refused to be demeaned, haunted her every step. Jessica felt not only the loss of her livelihood, but also the crushing burden of knowing that her own political bias had cost her everything. That afternoon, Karoline returned to her White House office, quietly sipping tea as she reviewed an email from her team. The message was stark and unequivocal. The boycott wave against United Airlines, ignited by her social media post, had sent the airline stock plummeting and forced top leadership to act. Attached to the email were detailed reports on public pressure and plans for staff retraining. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless, a powerful demonstration that actions have consequences. Karoline's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Jessica Reed has been officially fired." Karoline set her teacup down slowly, staring at the message without a trace of gloating. To her, Jessica's firing was simply a necessary step toward a larger systemic change. It was a confirmation that no one was above accountability, and it marked the beginning of a new era in which discrimination would no longer be tolerated. Later that evening, in a modest apartment far removed from the corridors of power, Jessica sat alone with a termination notice spread out on the table. Hours passed as she replayed the hearing in her mind, desperately searching for any justification, any way to rewrite the past. But no matter how hard she tried, the stark reality was inescapable. Her political bias had cost her everything. Friends and family reached out with messages filled with pity and judgment, yet Jessica felt isolated, trapped within the confines of her own regret. Years of dedication and professionalism meant nothing now. In the quiet solitude of that small room, the weight of her suspension, the impending investigation, and the painful awareness of her actions pressed down on her like an unyielding, final verdict. As the night deepened, Jessica's heart ached with the bitter knowledge that she had not only lost her career, but had also destroyed the trust of those she once served. The silence of her apartment was filled only with the echo of her remorse, and the lingering question of whether she would ever be able to atone for the injustice she had inflicted on someone as dignified and resilient as Karoline Leavitt. After the plane landed and the smooth rumble of the engines faded into a quiet hum on the tarmac, a heavy tension still clung to the air, a tension that spoke of consequences and irreversible decisions. As passengers unbuckled their seatbelts and gathered their belongings from the overhead bins, the cheerful chatter of reunited families and friends was punctuated by an undercurrent of unease. Jessica Reed, still reeling from the earlier chaos, sat in a small, cold holding room where every decision of the day replayed in her mind like an endless loop of regret. Each moment of that fateful flight, her rash, biased decision to move a first-class passenger simply because of her political views, eroded her confidence until what had once been her trusted instinct now stood exposed as an irreparable mistake. Jessica's phone buzzed abruptly, jolting her from the relentless spiral of self-recrimination. With trembling hands, she picked up the device and read a terse, impersonal message from United Airlines' HR department. "Jessica, please prepare to attend a disciplinary hearing at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Details will follow via email." The message was as cold as the steel chair beneath her, each word a final nail in the coffin of her once proud career. In that moment, she understood that the hearing was not merely a formality, but the airline's desperate attempt to salvage its reputation, an effort that placed her squarely in the role of scapegoat. While Jessica's world was crumbling in a sterile conference room at the airline headquarters, thousands of miles away, Karoline Leavitt was busy forging a new path forward. In the stately halls of the White House, where she served as a respected press secretary, Karoline had already transitioned from passenger to powerhouse. As she stepped out of her sleek black sedan, greeted by a courteous James who held the door for her, Karoline exuded the calm authority of a woman who had been tested and had emerged stronger. Her assistant, Sarah, carrying a folder brimming with documents, met her with a polite smile. Inside the folder were initial social media reactions, crew statements, and detailed reports of a boycott wave that had erupted against United Airlines. Karoline's eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the pages as she murmured, "They know this can't be covered up. Her tone was calm but laced with an unmistakable resolve to force systemic change in an industry long riddled with indifference and discrimination. Later that afternoon, as Jessica sat in the cramped, cold room, the sound of a television in the corner of a nearby waiting area broke through her thoughts. Desperate for any distraction, she turned on the TV only to be met with a news segment about workplace discrimination. The reporter's voice was measured and calm, but it was the brief interview with Karoline Leavitt that truly cut deep. Karoline spoke eloquently about the importance of systemic change and corporate accountability, her words measured and incisive, a stark contrast to Jessica's own inner turmoil. For the first time, Jessica did not see Karoline as merely an enemy or a target of her baseless prejudice, but as a person with every right to demand respect and change. The realization struck her with the force of a tidal wave, and she turned off the TV, sitting in stunned silence. In that silence, Jessica made a choice. She knew she could not change the past, but perhaps she could learn from it. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she reached for her laptop and began typing an email addressed to the leadership at United Airlines. This was not an email to defend herself or to seek sympathy. It was a heartfelt apology addressed not only to Karoline Leavitt, but to everyone who had been affected by her actions that day. In carefully chosen words, Jessica admitted her fault, confessing that her actions on the flight were inexcusable. She wrote, "Miss Leavitt, I owe you an apology. My actions were driven by assumptions rather than facts, and I failed to recognize your worth as a person deserving of respect. I am truly sorry for the pain and disruption I caused." Jessica went on to describe how the fallout from the incident had forced her to confront the depth of her own biases, expressing a sincere commitment to educate herself and grow from this experience. A week later, Karoline received an unexpected forwarded email with the subject line, "Apology from former employee." Curious yet cautious, Karoline opened it and read Jessica's earnest words. In the email, Jessica recounted the harrowing events of that day, the intense pressure of the disciplinary hearing, and her subsequent realization that her political bias had not only cost her her job, but had also harmed someone with dignity and grace. Jessica admitted that the environment which allowed her to act on prejudice had been a catalyst for change. A truth that, while painful, could serve as a lesson for all. Karoline's eyes softened as she read the message. Though she had long fought for accountability and systemic change, the raw sincerity of Jessica's remorse struck a chord deep within her. After a moment of reflection, Karoline typed a brief reply, "Thank you for your message. Taking accountability is the first step to growth. I hope you continue on this path and turn this experience into positive change moving forward." With that, Karoline closed her laptop and gazed out the window of her White House office, watching as the city lights flickered against the twilight sky. For her, the ordeal had never been about personal vindication. It was about creating a ripple effect of accountability that could extend far beyond one incident on a flight. The aftermath of that fateful day rippled across the airline industry like a shockwave. The boycott sparked by Karoline's social media post had plunged United Airlines into crisis. Stock prices tanked, customers canceled flights in droves, and the mounting pressure from political figures, including a pointed intervention by President Trump on Truth Social, forced United Airlines to publicly acknowledge their failures. In a desperate bid to salvage their reputation, the airline rolled out mandatory anti-bias training for all staff. A move that, while significant, only underscored the gravity of the situation. Karoline's role in driving this change was not highlighted as an act of personal retribution, but rather as a testament to the power of social media and the necessity for corporate accountability in today's polarized American society. Within days, the entire industry felt the tremors of that single act of discrimination. Other carriers began reviewing their own policies, and some even reached out to Karoline for advice on how to prevent similar incidents from occurring. Karoline, however, declined most of these overtures, choosing instead to focus on ensuring that United Airlines faced the full consequences of their shortcomings. Her aim was not to bask in personal glory, but to drive a fundamental shift in how companies treated their passengers, regardless of political persuasion or personal bias. On a crisp afternoon at the airport, Karoline returned to catch a work flight. At the gate, she noticed a remarkable change in the behavior of the staff. Smiles were more genuine, and questions were answered with thoughtful patience. Although not perfect, the shift was a clear sign of the pressure her actions had applied on the system. When she was recognized by the crew and greeted with a warm, "Miss Leavitt, welcome back," along with an offer of an upgraded seat as a token of gratitude, she accepted the compliment with a gracious but firm decline, stating simply that she was comfortable in her current seat. Her poise and humility continued to command respect, without the need for demands. As the plane took off once again, Karoline settled into her seat and quietly observed the attentive service around her. Across the aisle, she noted a young woman struggling with an overhead bag and witnessed a flight attendant rushing over to offer help. The simple act reminded Karoline of Emily, the only crew member who had shown genuine kindness during that turbulent flight, and she felt a surge of quiet satisfaction at seeing that her efforts to inspire change were bearing fruit. Back at the same time, far from the compassionate atmosphere Karoline now enjoyed, Jessica Reed was beginning her new journey. After the firestorm of events that led to her termination from United Airlines, Jessica found herself seeking redemption through service. She accepted a position at a nonprofit organization dedicated to workplace diversity and inclusion, determined to transform her painful experience into a catalyst for change. Though the road ahead was steep and fraught with challenges, Jessica was resolute in her commitment to learn from her mistakes and to help foster a culture of respect and accountability. As the flight continued its steady cruise at 30,000 feet, Karoline opened her notebook to a blank page and penned a simple yet powerful line. "Change begins with accountability, but grows through persistence." With that, she allowed herself a rare moment of peace, gazing out at the endless expanse of clouds and feeling, for the first time in a long while, a spark of hope. She knew that the fight was far from over, that the forces of discrimination and political bias still loomed large. But she also understood that the sky was not the limit, it was merely the beginning of a new era. This story, a dramatic saga of power, prejudice, and retribution, serves as a stark reminder that every action has consequences. It is a lesson in how unchecked personal biases can not only destroy a career, but can also bring down an empire. Karoline Leavitt's quiet strength and strategic resolve transformed a personal affront into a powerful movement, while Jessica Reed's downfall became a cautionary tale of the perils of discrimination in modern American society. As the digital age accelerates the spread of information and amplifies public opinion, every misstep, every act of bias now carries the potential to reshape the world around us. The era of accountability has begun, and the story of that ill-fated flight will serve as a lasting reminder. Respect and equality are not just ideals, but imperatives that must be upheld for the good of us all.